Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for PACO's February 20th, 2024 general membership meeting. We will go ahead and launch right into our presentation today. Today, we are very pleased to have with us Shafi Saiduddin, the owner of Pineland Investigations and a sustaining member of PACO. Shafi grew up here in Columbus and attended The Ohio State University in both undergrad and law school. He recently retired from the Army as a lieutenant colonel and has over 30 years of combined service in law enforcement, the intelligence community, and Army Special Operations Forces. Shafi has repeatedly deployed to Central Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and East Asia. His final assignment in the Army was as an instructor at the Joint Special Operations University. He has 8 articles published in military professional journals. After retiring from the Army, he began a second career providing investigative services to the legal community. His specialty is open source intelligence, and he maintains an active law license here in Ohio. We will let you get right to it, Shafi. Thank you.
Angela, thank you so much for the introduction. And I will, let me share screen here. All right. Here we go. And good afternoon. Thank you all for attending. So my name's Shafi. I'm going to teach a class on open source intelligence for legal professionals. It's very similar to a class I developed for the Joint Special Operations University. My specialty was in Army Civil Affairs. We collect information openly, but I also worked in the intelligence community where I've collected information clandestinely. So I've got to see it from both sides at a time when information is changing rapidly. In the last 20 years, the volume of digital information we have grew exponentially, and it created a lot of challenges for both the military and the intelligence community. So I based the class on that, give everyone an overview and familiarization. So we're going to talk about some of the terminology involved. I'm going to give you an overview of the online information environment. And then we're going to talk specific some of the data sources and databases that we as legal professionals use when preparing cases. And finally lead from that to some of the safety considerations, legal considerations, and the evolving problem of misinformation and disinformation. So learning outcomes, the purpose of the class is to help you conduct research better, as we all are conducting research for our employers and our clients, and be able to understand the terminology used, which is evolving. This is a pretty new field, and there are not a lot of accepted legal definitions, so a lot of things are still developing. I still call it the Wild West. Familiarization with the data sources and collection techniques, which also are changing, and understand the risks associated with collection, and some of the risks people don't really think about, but they are out there. So let's start off with some definitions, and this comes from the Department of Defense. They were one of the earliest adopters of the terminology, so we're going to go to that. There's not a legal definition of open source, so we'll use the government definition. Open source information is information any member of the public could lawfully obtain by request or observation. And if any of you have tech backgrounds, you've probably heard the term open source code, and that's coding materials that are open to anybody. It's free, and open source doesn't necessarily mean free, though. It means that you can lawfully obtain by a request, a subscription, purchase, but it means it's basically not governmental. It's not something that the government maintains a monopoly over. Now, the difference between open source intelligence and open source information is that intelligence is something that has systematic collection, processing, and analysis. And that's the key. Open source information is raw data. We can collect it, but it's still raw data. When you want it, information should tell you something or solve a problem or fill a requirement that you have, and processing and analysis are the keys. I'm going to bring back to this a couple times, but just remember the terms. Collection, processing, and analysis are the 3 steps within the intelligence process. Now, the term publicly available information is used, and it's often used interchangeably with open source. There's some slight differences, but they're both are used. The way I tend to look at it, open source techniques are used to collect publicly available information. So publicly available information is what is out there that we're looking for. And again, Department of Defense has one of the definitions that we accept. The California Consumer Privacy Act is another one that defines PAI, we call publicly available information. And I would expect to see this again as more states and the federal government look at data privacy restrictions. I have a feeling that this definition is probably going to get some traction. I think we'll see it again. I highlighted in blue a key piece, and that's the reasonable basis to believe that the information was lawfully made available. And we'll see that as we start getting into things like data breaches, and we talk about information that's floating out there that was stolen, privileged information. Private information gets onto the internet. But I suspect that the reasonable basis belief will be how we look at it from professional responsibility, from our legal liability perspective of what we can use when we're searching the internet and we're finding things. So with terminology, I want to go over a little bit of what we call the intelligence disciplines. This is from the government side. We have human intelligence. That's when we recruit a person to spy. You recruit an agent, the agent steals classified information from their military, their government. That's what we call human. Signals intelligence, intercepting signals, cell phones, radios. Geospatial intelligence is satellite imagery. Measurement and signal intelligence using various technical capabilities like radar, sonar, acoustic sound waves to use the signal to collect information back. Technical intelligence, information on it's essentially the collecting information on technical systems that an adversary may use. And then we have open source intelligence. And I put that last after all these others because the military and the government has really struggled with open source information. All of the other things we have a lot of control over. It's, the information is kept very closely. There is there are established collection platforms, budgets, people specialize in human intelligence, satellites. Open source intelligence, anybody with a computer can access. And, the military really had a lot of problems with this because it doesn't take a lot of budget. It doesn't build careers. And but it's been an adaptation process. And what I've seen is that the power of open source intelligence has really increased. Items that you would normally need to use any of the other intelligence disciplines to collect, you can find just openly on the internet. And I'm going to give an example right here. This is a Twitter feed from 2022 when the Russians invaded Ukraine. And I was sitting in my living room in the Washington, D.C. area, and I knew exactly the time that the Russians crossed the border because someone had posted that there was on Google Maps, there was a traffic jam at 3:15 in the morning. The road from Belgorod to the Ukrainian border was red. And the day before, another person on Twitter had posted a picture of a Russian armored column, and various OSINT researchers were able to geolocate where that armored column was. And they combined the two, all of a sudden they're on the move. That road is red. So at the very same time I'm seeing this happen live, I can see they're half the world away. I know exactly what time the Russians are invading Ukraine. Now, normally, if you didn't have that kind of access to the information, if you didn't have Twitter, if you didn't have people, Google Maps broadcasting all this and accumulating all this data, it would take a person on the ground, having a spy on the ground to look, a drone overhead, satellite imagery, something to see that. But all of a sudden, it's now open to everybody. And I will point out though that after that happened, within 12 hours, Google Maps blocked all the information from there, and they're looking at conflict reporting, and they basically shut down anything that could provide intelligence for any side. They try to remove that, but that's just to show how the capabilities have changed. so much within just a few years. Now, a couple other case studies. You'll get copies of slides, and you can use this. Look on your own. So a food delivery leak showed where Russian clandestine bases were. A lot of the buildings that they use for, their military intelligence, the GRU and the FSB. It was a data leak from a food delivery company. So people were, of course, at work, they're ordering their food, and they're using their numbers, the phone numbers from there, and they're giving an address, and all of this data is being collected. And of course, data that's collected can also be leaked or stolen, and it was out there on the internet. So someone can go through there and they can post all of the information openly, which Bellingcat did. And Bellingcat, they're a group of investigative journalists. I'll talk about them a little bit more later. Another incident that happened was when fitness trackers became popular, the Fitbits and the Strava app. So a lot of people within the military, we tend to be a little obsessed about fitness sometimes. So people were buying these, they're using it. The data from Strava was basically leaked as well, and it showed people who have military backgrounds, may live in certain places like Washington D.C. or Fayetteville, North Carolina, were running around airfields or basically rectangular strips in the dirt in middle places like Africa, and it identified U.S. bases. So this is the disruption when I say that the military has been struggling with over these years, is to see that, hey, people are collecting on us using this. We can also collect on them. How do we control it? How do we mitigate it? So it's a lot of the changes in the last few years we see coming from incidents like this. Now, the information trends, obviously, big decentralization of information. Information used to be controlled by governments, by big media sources. Now we're starting to see use of social media as a news source. People are putting more information out there about themselves, increased access to public records. We have AI-enabled search tools. We also have AI-enabled deepfakes. So the information that's getting out there that you're searching for, the two are fighting against each other. You have searches are getting better using artificial intelligence, but there's also more fake information being put into the media ecosystem. So you have to have new systems to detect the deep fakes. Adversary adaptation, it's an arms race. If we start looking at privacy laws, as privacy laws increase, as certain data sources dry up, people move to they find their new techniques for either for collecting information or for trying to hide. And the legal environment is constantly changing. Like I said, data privacy regulations. There's an emerging field of case law on this, but it's very much in its early stages. Now, this picture, I'm going to talk about the information environment, the surface web, deep web, and dark web. Is going to become a kind of a surprise to everyone, but how much of the internet do you actually access with search engines like Google or Bing? 4% or less. And I've heard some numbers say it's 2%. So the surface web is basically what can get indexed by the bots that Google uses to index web pages, to identify a web page and put it into their search engine where you can search it. But most of the information we need as legal professionals is in the deep web. So it's legal documents, government records, academic reports, financial records, and there's a distinction between deep web and dark web. Everyone thinks dark web nefarious. Deep web is not nefarious. Deep web is actually fairly innocuous. So I'll give an example of a deep web site is the Franklin County Municipal Court records online. You can go to that and go to the clerk of court's office. You can search that. So you can search by name or you search by case number. You can only do it from that site. So something on the surface web, you could punch in a case number in Google. If it was on the surface web, it would come up. But if you punch in that case number, you're not going to find it. You actually have to go to the county website. You have to get on that site, That's what we call deep web. But that's the majority of the information out there. The dark web is something entirely different. It's a subset of the internet. Again, a small sort of subset. It uses the Tor browser is the only way you can access these sites. They have a .onion address, and it's this was you've probably heard of this in the context of online marketplace for drugs, like the Silk Road or some of these other nefarious sites. That is one of the uses of it, and we tend to think of that. It's also used by a lot of serious journalists to talk to people in dangerous locations. So if a reporter has a source in in somewhere like Russia or North Korea or somewhere where you're not going to be able to get any direct communications with them, they can use dark websites to communicate with sources. But again, as I said, we're mostly focused on the deep web. The surface web it's low hanging fruit, and if you can find something on it, good. But generally, it's something that's password protected or at a site or covered by a subscription. Any questions about this? I think this picture really sums it up. So I do want to pause it for questions at this point, see if anyone has any questions, comments. No. Okay, we'll move on here. Now I want to talk a little bit about the people who are open source collectors and who are working in the same space. So the reason I want to do this, obviously legal professionals are involved, but there are also investigative journalists, there's academia, business intelligence services. What it is, because all of these people and all these groups are involved in that space, they provide resources. So like the investigative journalists like Bellingcat, they have a website which has a great deal of resources. If you're learning how to search for information, they give you a lot of good information. So it's worthwhile to kind of cross-pollinate between the different entities that are doing this. Take a look what they're looking for and what they're looking at, and maybe some of the same information you're looking for. One example, business intelligence services. They do a lot of reports on corporate data, a lot of private company information, and normally the up-to-date information they do goes to paid clients. But sometimes they post old reports, and they post old reports as kind of a marketing tool to get new clients, but it's something you can access. So if you wanted to find out about a certain company or about a certain market, a lot of that information is out there. I want to point out amateurs. There's the hashtag OSINT on Twitter and now X. There are a lot of people, it's their hobby. They spend time like the people I was talking about with the Ukraine invasion. They spend their time searching Twitter footage. They look at photographs. They are geolocating where a tank is, where a building is, and then they publish this stuff. It is something that is used by the government groups. We obviously have to verify it, but the information is out there. Activist groups collect information. So an example is if you have a client that's a corporation, they're involved in something controversial, they're probably being collected on there by different groups. And how you advise your client on what information they broadcast publicly, knowing that information is probably going to get picked up by someone else. The last two, foreign intelligence services and criminal networks. In the legal field, we see that in trade secret theft, intellectual property, corporate espionage. There are governmental groups involved in that. There are criminal networks involved in that, and they're both trying to steal information that's privately held, but they're also looking at what's available publicly and and sometimes the public access leads them to, for their targeting. So, for an example, if you are looking to steal trade secrets, you can go to LinkedIn and you can find who the employees of these companies are. You can start doing research on them, find out what their vulnerabilities are, and that's how they would look at somebody. I'm going to recruit them to try to steal these trade secrets. It's the basis of targeting starts in the open source arena.
Hey, Shafi, I have a question.
Okay.
How can a legal professional here on this talk with you use LinkedIn to garner information? I mean, some of the stuff is really high level, but how can we use it at our level?
It's, you know, it's well, that's really easy. I'll tell you one example would be um, trying to find former employees of the company. So if there's a lawsuit and you need witnesses to talk to, and obviously the company is an opposing party, they're represented by counsel. We can't talk directly to their employees. But former employees, they're not bound by that. They're not represented by counsel. It's former. They're fair game as far as talking to them. You can do searches on LinkedIn for people who have that in their profile. So I use one of the paid tools. I use the LinkedIn Sales Navigator. The paid tools generally have the better search functions, but you could look for everybody who's ever worked for that company and keeps that on their profile, and that gives you a list you can narrow down who to talk to. Now the trick with a lot of the open source is verifying that, because for example it's what people put on there themselves. It doesn't necessarily mean it's verified. I mean, obviously you have people like George Santos who who put a lot of information on themselves out there that's turned out not to be correct. But for a lot of things like that with the case, former employees, that's an easy one to find. If you are validating a witness for a case, you want to look at an expert witness. That's something you can start looking at people who have a particular background. You can look at educational levels, and then you can also use that to start verifying, see what they're claiming, and see if you can actually prove that. If you have an opponent in the case that has a expert witness, look for gaps in their experience where they may be lying about something, or maybe fraudulent academic credentials. Is that good? Okay, cool. So, and the use of the information, again, everyone knows, backgrounds, evidence collection, finding witnesses, but the volume of information that out there is making a lot of other things easier, like identifying connections between individuals and entities, finding those links, identifying patterns of fraudulent activities. Open source information is not just specific as in finding someone or something. We can use it to plan strategy, use it as in persuasion or negotiation, and exposing disinformation or misinformation. We can't take information at face value anymore. A lot of times we have to really look into it. So what's your opponent presenting in a case? What do you get in discovery? Sometimes you have to go back through and look at that and try to validate it. And that's there are a lot of open source tools out there you can use for that, but it's understanding the environment and knowing that there are a lot of sources out there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the data sources. Of course, public records are the gold standard for that. If it's, you find something in public record, it's valid, it's useful. Like if you're looking for criminal records, there are a lot of background checks, sources that use data that's bought from somewhere. So you can say that it looks like someone was charged with a felony. You can't confirm that until you actually get the public record. So you've got to, whatever source you use, you've actually got to go back and validate through that. Credit information feeds into the databases we use. Now, credit reports have a lot of rules on them. There's a Fair Credit Reporting Act. So there have to be permissible purpose to use that. Generally what it is, it's the information in the credit headers, the identifying information, addresses, things like that. That's what we find most useful. But you still have to have a permissible purpose to access it. Social media is a data source. People post things there. It's changing a little bit. In the early days of social media, people put a lot of stuff out there and they got caught and people got fired and things came out in court. And now people are a little more conscious of privacy settings. But that does also, a lot, but information that they have put out there, it's still out there. So deep searches and going back further, you can find things. I'm sorry, go ahead. Was there a question?
Oh, it's just a mic. I think it was a mic issue.
So some of the other data sources, location and marketing data. So geolocating, for advertising purposes. A lot of the phone geolocate data is sold. It's bought by data aggregators. License plate readers are another one. So not only do you have people going through tolls, you have car repossession companies are sending cars out with a camera and just doing optical character recognition on all license plates until they get a hit on a car that they're trying to repossess. But they also sell that data to data brokers. So an example of that, say you are trying to find a witness, all of the data sources you find are showing them living in Ohio. But or maybe you have to serve process on them, and a process server was never able to find him. There's no sign of him there. Then you can do a search on for real-time license plate data, and it turns out their car might have been spotted in Texas multiple times. So there's a good chance they may be living in Texas, but not on a lease, or not having anything that ties them to an address there. But that's more likely where they are. It's a good place, if you need to send a process server to serve them, that gives you another option. The last one I really want to talk about is data breaches, because that, again, it's a data source. And as I mentioned earlier, if you have stolen information, it really impacts how you can use it. You have to be cognizant of it. Again, if something is work product or privileged, it doesn't change the nature of the data, the fact that it's out there on the internet, and it's something that we have to be careful about. If you remember, like some of the classified information breaches, like WikiLeaks, we were always warned about that. Don't go to the WikiLeaks site. It's still classified. It's stolen and it's out there, but it doesn't change the nature of the actual information itself. Okay, commercial OSINT tools. Now, this is the one we deal with most on our day-to-day basis. Everyone's familiar with Westlaw, LexisNexis, the whole Nexus side of LexisNexis on the news, open source news data. But then there are a number of subscription databases that are only open to licensed attorneys, licensed private investigators. I'm not going to focus on any specific ones because there are a number out there. They change frequently. At the end of the presentation, I've got my contact information. If anyone wants to talk databases specifically, feel free to reach out to me and we can talk offline about them. They're great tools. It can speed up a lot of your research, but it's commercial data, and the subscription databases available to legal professionals usually have requirements as far as permissible purpose. A lot of them are using credit header data, so you can't just use it for, it has to be tied to a valid case. It has to be tied to fraud. There are a number of Fair Credit Reporting Act compliance requirements. And these databases are also audited. So that's something to be aware of, that every now and then the data provider may want to see what you're using it for and may request your records. Social media we talked about, and the automated search tools associated with it, the geolocation data, vehicle tracking, they're business entity information databases that are not always used by legal professionals, but they're used in the corporate intelligence world, business intelligence world, marketing. And like I said, if you start looking at who else is looking for this stuff, you might find the stuff you're looking for in a completely different database that could be very useful. So there are issues with the commercial databases. Now, it is not the end all and be all. First of all, it's raw data. As I mentioned before, data has to be collected, processed, and analyzed. And when most of the times what they're doing is they are using personal identifying information and an algorithm to pick up all the information they have in their database related to those personal identifiers, and they make a list. So you can have a list of people, 20 addresses where they've lived at. It doesn't tell you anything more than that. It's just that address has been tied with that person. It could mean they lived there and signed a lease. It could mean they had a service connected there, like cable or internet, or it could mean they had a delivery service like the food delivery apps that they were using that address to have food delivered to. So it doesn't necessarily tell you anything specific. It tells you, it gives you data that you can use to develop intelligence on. So, one example, if you have a person who has 20 different addresses in just like the last 10 years. Now, it could be that they were in the military or in a profession where they had to move a lot. It could also be that they were avoiding creditors or they had warrants for their arrest and they're moving a lot too. But it takes all of that information putting together to analyze that to make a determination whether what their behavior, what the data indicates in terms of behavior. The commercial databases are also incomplete. The vendors use different data sets. The data is up for purchase on the open market. Different companies buy different sets of data. So there's subtle differences between those. So as an example, I use a lot of commercial databases in my investigations. I use minimum of 3 paid databases, and then I use 2 other AI related search tools. But I've tried different ones. I'm always evaluating them, and you're going to see subtle differences between those. Information that comes from commercial databases requires verification. You can't take it necessarily at face value. You have to go back, look at the public records, look at the sources. It's always subject to mistake. The biggest mistake is data entry. And we see that a lot with public records. You see whoever was the clerk in the office, names get transposed, social security numbers get transposed. A typical thing that I'll see people with 2 social security numbers or 2 dates of birth. Sometimes it's an indicator of identity fraud, either that they're a victim of or maybe that they were perpetrating. But more often than not, somebody typed the numbers wrong and it's showing up. So it's just something to be aware of. Again, compliance requirements. And I always look at the commercial databases. It's the start point of investigation, not the end point. We'll see as a trend as the tools have increased, collection has become easier and faster. Processing has become easier and faster. Analysis is not, because the analysis is still the what separates good information from bad and makes information usable. Now, this is a sample of just some of the OSINT links out there. Don't take notes on this. Don't do anything. This is just this is one of those people in that, hashtag OSINT, someone who's a researcher or a hobbyist, and they just put a list and they put this out there, and people do that. There are a lot of reference sites out there. This is just the first page of it. There's like 10 pages on this particular site of links to everything from phone numbers, crime and criminal records. Some of these links are probably not good anymore now. So the changes within 6 months, and definitely in a year, you're going to see a lot of changes. You have the people who are not attorneys or private investigators and don't have access to the commercial databases that are restricted by license. So they use a lot of these sites, and they use a lot of free sites. Some of them are pay sites. And again, it's just something to be aware of. And as you start looking at some of the references and resources, you can find new sites that work, and you find other ones that don't work so well. So I'm going to give some examples of some of the different sites out there. So vessel tracking is one. So, ships have transponders, and you can go to a number of different sites. You can find a lot of locations of where a particular ship happens to be. So another example, if say you're looking for a witness or looking for someone to serve, they're not at their address. They have a boat registered to them. Where's the boat? You may be able to get an idea where they are. If the boat or the ship, it may be the subject of a lawsuit. It might be an asset that they're trying to hide. It could be something that was stolen or misappropriated by someone. These kind of tools can give you an idea of how to find that. Might give you an idea of where that particular vessel might be located.
Shafi, do the Russians use this?
The Russians do use this. So, and actually people who are tracking the Russians are using this. So currently, you have a lot of the Russian oligarchs are sanctioned, and people are looking to see where their yachts are and where they're going. The Bellingcat, I think, had a story about Vladimir Putin's yacht that was where it was stored, and the linkages you start finding all the linkages through this. A lot of these people try to keep their ownership private, but you can find the vessel. Sometimes you can find who it's registered to. You can find it registered to the company, and you start tracking all those little leads down there. Do I have a question in chat?
Oh, it was a snarky comment, which was awesome.
Okay. Of course, good.
We encourage the snarky comments.
Absolutely. Now, I haven't heard of any cases where anybody has returned to a dock and had a process server waiting for them because they've used this, but I expect that will happen at some point. So the next, here's another one, flight tracking. So same thing, aircraft and tail numbers, and it's these first started. We first started seeing this when activists were exposing intelligence operations by looking at clandestinely used tail numbers and publishing that. But it works the other way too. So there's a couple years ago, there's a high school kid who was compiling a list of Russian oligarch jets and posting that on Twitter, and basically just tracking them all over the place. Had the tail numbers of the planes, and you could just see where they are, what countries they're going to. It's a useful tool. Obviously, law enforcement is following this kid and looking to where, and he's helping them out with things. But you got to verify the information again. Now, one advantage to flight tracking over some of the vessel finding is that, especially with the FFA, the registration requirements, it's easier to find an ownership information. And then you can look at other corporate sources to try to track down who are the beneficial owners of these corporations. So again, for finding hidden assets, very useful.
How is that? Oh, sorry,
Go
Shafi. Back to that last slide.
Yeah.
So what was the most popular flight tracking have you come across?
So there's an entire subculture and community around this, and they'll even post like what, so you see up in the corner there, most tracked flights. So last week it was Taylor Swift's flight to Australia. So a lot of people was just sitting there, and yep, fans, maybe some stalkers, who knows? Yeah, people, this information's out there. It gets posted. People pay attention to this. So there are a lot of people you wouldn't expect out there looking at certain things like that. So here's another one, a little more technical, cell tower locator. This if you're looking at a case where you need to get a court order to get records from a particular phone company, and you're thinking there's a tower near the site of whatever the incident happened, or your client's house or your opponent's house, and you want to get geolocation data, want to know what cell phones were in that area at a certain time, and if it can be requested or compelled, sites like this can give you exactly what company owns it. It can narrow it down, save time. It just basically these can save a lot of time in preparing requests and preparing court information.
Can you use that to find witnesses too, or no?
For the
Legally?
cell phone, no, generally not. I think it would be more to find out what cell phones were in the area, or if you a case might be if you have a so in a lot of criminal defense cases, you have people who are trying to show that their location was not in the area where they had the crime. So if you could get cell phone data on your client's information, it's harder to get data on other people. That's the problem. And again, like with that, law enforcement has it a little easier. They can with probable cause they can get a warrant for it. But that information is typically private data. But you could find things like the volume of traffic in a certain area. So that's something that data in terms of numbers, percentages, you're more likely to get something like that. So talk can't really talk about artificial intelligence without or talk about OSINT without bringing in artificial intelligence. Now that is it's a hot topic in almost everywhere, but I wanted to point out one thing about artificial intelligence and OSINT. It's about the collection and processing. It speeds up the time. It doesn't take the place of analysis. So a lot of these tools are making it faster on one end. They're not necessarily making it faster overall. So there's a nuance to it. So artificial intelligence makes our search engine interfaces easier. So if you remember early days of doing searches, there's search modifiers. You have to put certain things in parentheses, use an asterisk as kind of the wild card, all of those kind of things. Now, what artificial intelligence does, it makes search engine interfaces where you can use normal language. So it's, chat GPT, tell me where I can find this. And that normal language is going to work its way into a lot of the data tools we use. So it does make it easier. It doesn't change what you're actually getting. The artificial intelligence is still using a data set, the same data set that's out there. So if you're looking at the surface web, it's not going to get you into the deep web. It's still going to be searching surface web. But there are other tools out there like web scraping. They go that you can get photographs. You can look for a particular photograph. You can have various search parameters. They can search data and basically pull that out of multiple sites and compile it for you. You can do reverse image searches, facial recognition software. There are a few of those out there that you can use. There's social media searches. Like I said, a lot of the information you want from social media data could be really old, and you're talking large volumes. So there are companies that develop tools that they can go back through, and again, this is publicly available information. So if somebody's locked down their privacy settings, you're not going to be able to get that, but you can get what is out there. Another very useful thing that artificial intelligence does, it helps you visualize the data. So it can in that processing side, it can make graphs, link analysis documents that still need to be analyzed, but it puts the data in graphic representations that make it a little easier for you to process large volumes. And I think the biggest problem we have now is it's information overload. I think we see this in our daily lives, just how many emails you get every day, how many text messages. When you're looking at a case, how much information is out there that could impact the case. And if you can visualize that in a little easier manner, that's a big help. So again, AI requires analysis. So the things that artificial intelligence can't do, it can't give you context. It does not have experience. So, an example could be cases of financial fraud. So you have money laundering. There's a lot of anti-money laundering software. There's intelligence tools out there, but it's the experience of interpreting it. Sometimes you need that expert who is a former IRS or Treasury agent, who's been doing that for 10, 20 years. Document cases, AI has bias. It's written into it. It's who creates it. Their biases get passed on to the algorithms. It's having that human eye on it helps to counteract bias. With investigations, there's an art and a science to it. There's, AI is definitely the science part, but creativity, intuition, knowing where to look for something and making an assumption based on the data you have and we call it pivot points, but you take it in a different direction based on the assumption you're making. AI can't do that. And then we start looking at laws and ethics, your professional responsibility, and just some of those nuances of like I said, where do you get the data from? Are you looking at data that was privileged but it's been stolen and put out there? There are a lot of liability questions that you can't depend on AI. And as we see, people have done that and they've gotten in some trouble over that. Talk a little bit about collection risks. So say one of my fellow instructors at Joint Special Operations University liked this phrase: every time you look at the internet is looking back at you. It's not a one-way street, you know. Um, when you do that, you have an IP address, you have websites send out cookies to your computer. They are identity risks. So social media profiles, that's a big one. Are you looking at an opposing party or a witness on your own social media? That's a problem because they can see you on that. That's we did talk about LinkedIn. LinkedIn has a privacy setting. You can look as as an anonymous user. Um, with Facebook and Twitter and some of the others, it's a little more difficult. There open source researchers usually create fake accounts. Again, this is a violation of the policies of these companies. So when they find them, they delete them. But you have to be able to mitigate those risks. You know, I use a virtual private network, a VPN. You can use virtual machines. A virtual machine is an operating system within an operating system. So that if it's not tied to your computer, and if your virtual machine is infected by malware, you can delete the virtual machine. It's not going to affect the rest of your computer. Use burner phones, some of the AI tools. Now, I think the big thing is the AI tools that are doing these searches for you. Like I said, with social media, now we have companies that will go through there and you give them the search parameters, they are going to access the publicly available social media profiles and bring that information back to you as a cutout. So you're not having to go on there either in your personal account or a fake account and try to directly engage with that. And there's another risk with social media profiles. So as I mentioned, people are locking down their privacy settings. So supposing you have an opposing party in a case, you want to see what they're posting. You know, you can't friend them. You can't uh, contact them. They're represented by counsel. So, you know, that there are cases where people have done that and gotten in trouble. Investigators have gotten in trouble doing that. It's still communication with them, and if they're represented by counsel, that's something to keep in mind. Cybersecurity risks. Now, malware, a lot of sites you go to, if you can't verify where the site is, that's a problem. Now, the dark web has its own set of risks, and what I'll say about the dark web is don't try this at home. Don't. This is something, if there's anything you're going to outsource any dark web searches. There are definitely legitimate reasons for it. You could have, one case could be, and I've seen this, as clients who have unique items that are stolen, like sports memorabilia, artwork, certain things that can be, they can't just take it to a pawn shop and sell it. It's going to go to a very specific collector. It'll probably never be seen again. And there are marketplaces on that they sell that. So there are investigators who go on there and look for particular items and try to track down it or try to buy it and try to recover it from the person who stole it from. But the dark web has a lot of risks. There's malware. You need to use the Tor browser. You need a VPN. There are a number of other security precautions. Never use your own computer for it. People who do dark web searches, and I've done that. I've done it on a completely separate computer that is not used for anything else, just because the risk factor is high. And also, you'll be looked at by law enforcement, by intelligence agencies. They're on there all the time. It sends a signal. It probably puts puts a little bit of focus on you and what you're doing on there. So just be very, very careful with dark web. Now, finally, I want to talk a little about disinformation and misinformation. Very simple. Disinformation is intentional. Misinformation is a mistake. Both of them get amplified. So when you're looking at information, you have to really question that and you have to really think about it. Was it, the best way is to find a actual source for it. Find a so if you can trace it back to public records or a court case or anything that has any known legitimacy, that solves your problem for you. But we're all familiar with the case. We've heard this. The link is there for the New York attorneys who were sanctioned for using ChatGPT. They went on their ChatGPT, gave them, I think, about half a dozen cases that were completely made up. totally fake cases. They presented that in a case. They received monetary sanctions and I believe a suspension too. But that's a good example of that. That's misinformation that is out there, and you have to be very, very cognizant of it. Now, a couple references. As I mentioned, there's a big community out there. There are a lot of OSINT references. That whole list I showed, but I would start with these two. I'd start with Bellingcat, the investigative journalist, and there's a guy named Michael Basil. He has a inteltechniques.com. When he's been in the business for a long time. I bought his book many years ago. I've studied a lot of his techniques. Those are probably the two very well respected sites you could start with. And if you want to improve your own research techniques, I would start there and then start getting off into the other resources out there, because there are always new tools. New tools are popping up all the time, but at least have a good grounding of how to do the research, how to understand, use these tools, and the big thing is this can really, we're all researchers, whether, investigator, paralegal, attorney, we have cases to build, we have research, we need information, there are questions to answer, and open source intelligence is one way of filling the information gaps that we have when we're looking at building a case. So that's the basic why of what we do this, and hopefully I've helped give you some of the how and where to start, where to look, and if you need to reach out to me, I'm on LinkedIn. Here's my phone number, email. Be changing it a little bit. I'm doing a rebranding of my company. We're gonna have a different name in about a month here, but you feel free to contact me on this information. It's still going to be good. But at this point, are there any questions? Questions, comments? Anyone have any thoughts on, have you used any of these techniques at work? Is there anything that you, any databases you like, don't like, anything like that? Nope. In that case, I will go ahead and stop share.
I'm curious how much time people are spending on investigating, because I think it does fall on the paralegal to do a lot of that in the office, some of that background.
Yeah, I'm not doing a lot of high level research. I think my attorney prefers that anything higher level, more than just a general Google search, be conducted by either outsourcing it to a private investigator, or we sometimes will give things to the firm librarian and ask her to search databases for us. But yeah, this is so fascinating, such interesting information that who would have ever thought?
No, it does change a lot too. So with this class, I update it about every 6 months, and because it does, it's going to change again pretty soon.
Yeah, oh, I'm sure. Well, great. We have a few minutes remaining. So if nobody has questions, I will just do a couple of announcements, and then we can get back to having a couple of minutes of our lunch hour. First and foremost, we want to thank you, Shafi, for being with us today and sharing your time and your expertise. This was absolutely fascinating. It blows the mind, the things that you've talked about. We also want to thank Anderson Reporting for providing our Zoom link and recording today's session. We want to thank everyone for taking your time out to be with us today. And a couple of announcements. The annual food drive is still in full swing. This is something that will be going on through the end of the month, so you've still got another 9 days. If you or anyone in your firm has any non-perishable items that you would like to contribute, please reach out. We will make arrangements to get those items from you to include with our donation of non-perishables to Mid-Ohio Food Bank. Apologies, Mid-Ohio Food Collective now. Also, another way to get involved, you can make a financial donation on our behalf. There's a link in the PACO news that's coming out here in about 5 minutes that will take you directly to Mid-Ohio's own website. You can make your donation there with credit card. Mid-Ohio will provide your tax receipt and they will notify us of your gift on our behalf. I would encourage everyone to go to your attorney, go to your firm, ask them if they would consider making a financial donation to Mid-Ohio on our behalf. It's a great way to give back to the community and help those in need here in our own backyard. Let's see. Paralegal Day, we still are planning that. Plans are full steam ahead. We've got our keynote speaker. This year we're going to have Ohio Supreme Court Justice Michael P. Donnelly. He is a fascinating speaker. If you've never had the opportunity to hear him speak, you definitely don't want to miss this. We also will be having information coming out soon about different scholarships, awards of excellence, and sponsorship opportunities. That information will be coming out very soon, I hope. Let's see, next event is next week on Thursday, February the 29th. Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas Judge Deborah Turner will be joining us for a Black History Month presentation. Her speech is called A View from the Bench, Paralegals, Valuable Members of a Legal Team. That will be interesting to hear a judge's perspective of what we do. So that is next Thursday, February 29th. Registration is open on the website. Our next general membership meeting will be Tuesday, March the 19th. David Kudik will be joining us. He is the board chair and attorney services director with the Ohio Supreme Court. He'll be joining us to talk about unauthorized practice of law and recent issues coming out from the Supreme Court. Again, registration is open on the website, so please sign up for that. And then the Workers' Compensation Roundtable will meet again on Thursday, March the 21st. Attorney John Goodman will join us and provide a case law update. And I'm sure that he will discuss the recent AutoZone case that is pending now in the Ohio Supreme Court. This case has very much impacted the voluntary abandonment argument in workers' compensation claims and has been a big buzzword and has generated a lot of talk in the workers' comp arena. So that will be a fascinating discussion, I'm sure. More news will be coming out in the PACO news here in about 2 minutes, and the website is updated with the news, so you can check that as well. Thank you, everyone, once again for sharing your lunch hour with us, for being here, and we will see you next time. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, Angela. Thanks, everyone, for attending.
Thanks,
Thank
Angie.
you.
And the recording will be available in the Dropbox.